What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I had an issue the other night with my computer, and I wanted to bring you on in here to maybe help you if you have something of the same issue with a couple of the troubleshooting steps I had. So the other night I came home from work and I came down here to start editing, and I noticed that everything was slow, a lot slower than I'm used to. So the first thing I did was opened up Task Manager. So here's my Task Manager window, and I went over to performance and I noticed that my CPU speed was at 3.6. That was my first red flag because I have this overclocked to 4.6 gigahertz. And then I looked up over here and I noticed that I'm only showing 8 gigabytes of total memory. Now down here it shows 16 gigabytes with 5.6 committed. But then up here it only shows 8 gigabytes. So I said, I have 16 gigabytes. What is going on here? So I opened up my Extreme Tuning utility and I saw that my overclock had gone away completely. And that happens sometimes. But what I can usually do is come here, go to load profile, and it'll automatically switch this to 46. Well, it didn't. It only kept it at 38. And you can see here, I can't go any higher. So that was my big red flag. That and the fact that Windows can only see 8 gigabytes total. What I decided to do was restart the system and go into our UEFI setup. And if you don't know how to do that, once you get your post screen, you just hit F2 or delete until it beeps. There it beeped. And now we're going into our setup utility. So here in the UEFI setup utility, you can see right here that A1 and B1 have nothing in the slots. All we're seeing is A2 and B2. What that means is of the 4 slots on your motherboard, if you have 4, 2 of them aren't populating. So right here is the system browser. And if you click on that, it'll bring up everything that your computer has something connected to. So you can see all of my hard drives are showing up. I have 6 hard drives in here. My graphics card is showing up. This COM port is showing up. I don't know what COM A does. And then over here, we have our RAM slots. Now the crazy part is that the system browser sees all 4 sticks, but our utility doesn't see either of them, and Windows doesn't see all 4 of them. So let's get into the troubleshooting. So the first thing you always want to do when you're troubleshooting is you want to shut down your system completely. And then you want to make sure that you turn the power switch off back here and unplug it. Open up your computer. Try to reseat your RAM slots. So these are my RAM sticks right here, right? So you pop off the one side, and then with it vertical, you want to hold onto it and pop off the bottom side so it doesn't fall out. So you pull them all out. They're all out. So then you just take them one by one and pop them back in until you hear 2 clicks or 1 big click. And you do that for all 4 of them. Making sure they're in the slot and clicked. Okay, so with all 4 of them seated again, let's see if our UEFI notices that they're on, that they're back in. What do 4 beeps mean? This is new. Uh-oh. So that just clicked off. Did I just break this? Oh. Oh, no. Well, in trying to show you what was going on, we came up with a new issue. It reboots itself and boop, 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 boop. Sugar smacks. No post. 4 beeps means that a motherboard timer is not working properly. A hardware failure with an expansion card or the motherboard itself could be the cause of the beep code. Okay, so let's shut this off. So what I just did was I turned the power button off because the power wouldn't work. And I turned the power back on and hit it, and we have post now. So we're gonna hit F2. And as you can see, it's still not detecting the other 8 gigs of RAM. And if we go in the system browser, you can see they're all 4 still there. So what's the next step? So what I did personally was I took and I tested each stick of memory itself in the first slot. You have to have the first slot populated for any of the other slots to work. This is 2-channel memory, so we have slots 1 and 3 work together, and slots 2 and 4 work together. So let's do that. And since we are getting more deep into this, I'm gonna take the computer and flip it on its side to make things easier. Alright, so here's our 4 sticks. The first thing that we'll do, as always, you wanna make sure that your power button's off. then you just pop them out again. So we pull them all back out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, I guess that first one we can just put back in, hey? So we'll pop this one back into its slot, firmly press on both sides, and we'll start her up again and go in the UEFI. And what we can see is what we expected. A1 is populated with memory. So you do the same thing for each stick of memory all the way through. Turn the power switch off, take this stick out, put it over in a different pile, so we know we tested that already, and we put our next stick in. Now that stick's good. Next stick in, and we can see that that slot is good as well. Our last stick. That stick there is good. So what this tells us is that all 4 of our memory modules are good, so we don't need to worry about them. Now we're getting into a little bit more difficult of a task, which is we're gonna pull off the CPU and we're gonna check and make sure that the pads on the Intel chip are good and that the pins on the motherboard look good. Make sure there's nothing bent, not a little short somewhere, a little burning that would have indicated over voltage, overpowered, power surge, anything like that. And then we're gonna reseat the CPU, because just like RAM, a CPU can come unseated just by a little bit. There's a lot of pressure under there, but it's still possible. We're gonna reinstall all of our memory, and then we're gonna start to pull the CPU off. Okay, so this is where things start to get a little tricky. If you are barely comfortable with doing the RAM by yourself, and you haven't built a computer before, I would recommend getting somebody to at least sit there with you and assist you with that. But I'm gonna walk you step by step on how to remove a cooler. This is an all-in-one by Corsair, as well as pull the CPU off without breaking anything. I just knocked on some wood there. To take a CPU radiator off, the first thing to do is to pull out these 4 screws that are holding the cooler radiator and the cooling fan against your chassis. So it's just 4 screws. So then we take our cooler out, set that to the side. We take our fan out, set that to the side. You just take your screwdrivers. So we're gonna pull that off. It's okay if it's a little snap, that just means you had a really good thermal paste application. The next thing you do, they have this tension arm right here. You're gonna pull that out from underneath, and that releases the tension, and if you pull it all the way back, it lifts up the lid, and now you have full access to your CPU. You'll pull that out. So these are called pads. They don't have pins on them like AMD does. Intel uses pads on the CPU and pins on the motherboard. So we're going to check all these pads and make sure that there isn't a little burn mark on any of them to indicate a power surge or an overpower, which there doesn't seem to be on here. So the CPU is good. When you go to set this aside, if you don't have the OEM tray for it anymore that it came in, you want to set it on this side. Now this stuff is tricky to get off of anything, so you want to set it on something plastic and that you can throw away. And the next thing to look at is the pins. Let's get a closer look. The easiest thing to do is to take a flashlight, I'm using my cell phone here, and just move it around to make sure that the reflection you see from the pins are all going in the same way. Now you can see there's 2 plastic breaks here. The pins on the left side, they go in one direction, and the pins on the right side go in another direction. So as long as none of those pins are showing a different reflection, you can assume that your CPU socket is good. Now we know that the CPU physically and the CPU socket, from what we can see with our naked eye, is working just fine. So the next thing to do is to take our thermal paste off of here and our thermal paste off of our CPU cooler. Whether it's an all-in-one cooler or it's an air cooler, the pad on the bottom that makes contact with the CPU, any thermal paste on there needs to be taken off and reapplied. So what I like to use are some alcohol pads and then a microfiber cleaning cloth. The big thing is that if there's anything on this chip besides thermal paste, it's going to mess up the heat conduction. So we take our first pad out, and if it's been a few years, it might be a little difficult to get the first bit off because it's good and dry on there. You want to make sure you get as much of it off as you can. If there's any around the side. And we take our microfiber cloth, and what this does is this gets any residual thermal paste that we can't see off of that chip too. So now that's good and the top is nice and clean, we can just set that down right there. Next is our CPU cooler. So for this, we're gonna grab a new pad and do the same thing. You wanna use a new one because that old one has all that thermal paste from the CPU, and if you just, keep using it, you'll just be spreading out thermal paste as opposed to getting it off. This discoloration is from the original thermal paste that came with the Corsair. And we just take our microfiber cloth. You can use the same one, no problem, but that looks good. Now, reinstalling our CPU and our CPU cooler back at the computer. This is actually a pretty easy step. You see on here, there's a small triangle right there. You can see right here, there's a small triangle. You want to match up both triangles. So we just take that, plop that on there, make sure it's nice and snug. It's in there where it's supposed to be. Then you take the top tray, underneath of this screw, those two forks go, and then you just push it on there and clip it in. Easy peasy, right? So we take our thermal paste, and I do a little bit of a line right in the middle of it. And then we take our cooler, and then we just reinstall our tension screws. Now when you're reinstalling your tension screws, you want to do it across, diagonal ways, so that the tension is even. If you do one side and then you do the other, the tension will be uneven. And you want a nice even set so that you get nice and even cooling. That's the way you want to tighten them as well. One thing to never forget if you have a cooler with a pump is to reinstall the pump. Now that's on there and that's good to go. So the next thing to do is to reinstall our radiator and our fan. Now on each fan, usually you'll see two arrows with the rotation of the blade and the direction of the air. We want this to pull the hot air out of our system. So we'll take this and make sure the air arrow is facing that way, and then the cooler just goes on however you can get it. All right, we have our CPU and our cooler back in and everything back to going. So let's turn her on and see what we got. We hit our power on the back, and we hit our power on the front. And hope we don't get any beeps. And we hit our F2. There's our beep. When we get back in here, A1 shows none and B1 shows none. So the next step is the most hairiest step, and that is flashing our BIOS. Now the BIOS, as I understand it, is basically like the backbone of your whole computer system. Basically is the instructions for the motherboard to actually work. Even though this might seem easy, it is a very, very, very easy thing to go wrong. If you go to flash your BIOS and your BIOS doesn't wake up, if you go to flash it and you have a power outage, if you go to flash it and something in the BIOS file that you have is wrong, then you could have an issue where your computer's basically dead. Not only do you have half of it working, now none of it is going to work. So huge disclaimer, do this at your own risk, okay? So how do you find your BIOS? Well, you go to your browser and then you search for your motherboard. Mine is an ASRock Z75 Pro 3 BIOS. Hit enter. This is a new BIOS for me, version 2.1. A link to go to actual ASRock. Now instant flash, if you click on this, it'll tell you how to do an instant flash. So we download for the global, that downloads as a zip file, and then you just extract it, boom, boom, boom. And now the most important part is you need a thumb drive, a flash drive. Go into download 2.1, we're gonna copy, and then we're gonna go down to our USB and paste. We're gonna close everything out, or we're gonna go back into our UEFI. Where we are right now, if you want to turn back, please feel free to. You have done nothing that will harm your computer at all. But if you are ready to go forward with your BIOS flash, let's go. In ASRock's utility is we're going to go to advanced, and then we're going to go all the way down to instant flash. Hit enter. Picked our Z75 Pro 32.10. That's the file on our stick. If you don't see it, you can hit refresh, and it'll refresh, look in all the USB ports again. This is the one we want. We click on it. Now it says do not power off, processing crashless feature, and you do not touch your computer right now. You just let it do its thing. Right, so now we got programming success. Press enter to reboot. So cut off, cut back on, and then we can go straight into our UEFI to see if it detects our other two sticks. And of course, it did not. We still have A2 and B2 and nothing in A, B1 and A1. So, why do we just spend all of this time and the problem's not solved? What we've determined is that the CPU is fine. We've determined that the RAM is fine. We tried to do a BIOS update, but the BIOS update did nothing. So that means that our motherboard is starting to die. Right now, I have half a system. I wanted to go through these steps to try and help you out, have like a one-stop shop for all of these things, because I was going from website to website to website to try and figure out what exactly I could do to rule out everything else but the motherboard. So if one of these fixes helped you, let me know down in the comments below. I'd really like to know if there's something else I can do. Let me know down below. I do have another thought in my mind about trying to reflow a motherboard, but I want to wait until I get my new one in, just in case I bugger this one up completely and I don't have a motherboard left. I think it'd be a neat challenge. But like this video if you liked it, like this video if it helped you out. Comment down below which step actually helped you in your computer troubleshooting plight, and subscribe for I don't know what. I do all kinds of different videos on here. You can start scrolling down and see. We're a family vlog mostly, but when things like this happen or I get projects that I can record in a timely manner, I record them and throw them up here anyway. Subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Whoopsie! Break this without even trying.